Welcome back to Button Day. I hope you guys are all in the program and waiting and getting your first drives in. But first, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this channel. It's actually me, CfTesla. Now, if you're new to the channel, I joke around and have a lot of fun. So I made this shirt called I Push the Button. It happened to actually arrive and come out today. And I actually kind of love it. So on the front, we got I Push the Button. On the back, we got Let It Drive, my brand. And we also got them in these awesome hoodies. So if you want to support the channel, click on the link down below. Get yourself one of these hoodies. It's super fun and an awesome conversation starter. All right, let's get to the video. All right, this is really important. So we're going to talk about and really break down some new developments that I found out about how they're actually rating the system, stuff that I was actually wrong about in our last video that I've learned today. We're going to take a look at my very first drive and my score. Then we're going to talk about some things that you really need to know about how this all works, as well as some of my suspicions. And then we're going to close up talking about how the actual scoring system actually works in terms of daily versus overall score. So first, let's talk about the 5 different safety ratings that they're actually judging us on while we're out there driving. Now, the reason we're talking about this again is because there was an old formula that used to exist and people basically reverse engineered it, and you saw it all over articles and news. I even saw it and used it. But the fact is that on Tesla's website, it's not that way. It's totally different standards for quite a few different things. So we're going to get into that. All right, so here are the parts that are actually the same as we talked about in the last video. So the first one is hard braking. So they still don't want you hitting the brakes too hard, but let me tell you more specifically what you don't want to do. You don't want to do anything over 0.3 Gs. And to put that into proper English, that means that you are not decreasing your speed by more than 6.7 miles per hour in any 1 second. So if you're decreasing it at 6 seconds, you're okay, but 6.7, not okay. The next one is unsafe following distances. Now, we talked about this before, but there's some new developments on this. So what they're referring to is the distance between your car and another car. And that gap in the middle is something called the headway. And how the headway is measured is how many seconds it would take you if they were to come dead stop to hit them. So if you had a 3-second headway, that would mean that if they slammed on the brakes, you would hit them in 3 seconds. And so for the purpose of this test, what they call an unsafe following distance is anything 1 second or less. So if I'm going to hit you in 1 second or less, you would get a knock for that. So if you keep your car like 3 seconds or more behind, it gives you a little bit of a buffer. It actually let you get fairly close. I was kind of surprised at 1 second. So just make sure you keep that gap at least over 1 second distance, maybe 2 car lengths, 3 car lengths, and you're going to be okay. Also, this only applies if you're going under 50 miles per hour. So if you're going over 50 miles per hour, you can follow as close to people as you want, apparently. So do all your high speed, like crazy driving over 50 miles per hour, I guess, and you'll be fine. But if you're under 50 miles per hour, you fall into these checks, these parameters, and that's how you're going to get yourself a knock, is if you're that 1 second or less. So out of the 5, those were the 2 that stayed the same. Now, these other ones are a little bit different, changed, and there's a whole new one in there. First, let's talk about the forced disengagement. That is what we talked about in the last video, but I understood it a little bit wrong. I explained it as when your car just simply turned off autopilot without you turning it off. Maybe it went into a situation it wasn't comfortable with and just straight up killed it. That's what I thought a forced disengagement was, but that's not what Tesla's looking for here. What they're looking for is while you're running into autopilot and it terminates itself to the point where you can't turn it back on until you end that drive and start a new one. And the only way that happens is if you've ignored enough warnings that it says, forget you, man, you're not even paying attention, you're not listening, you're done using autopilot on this drive. And one that you see happen a lot of times is if you just ignore the put your hand on the wheel signal. So if you're getting that flashing up saying put your hand on the wheel, it's going blue, faster, 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 pretty soon it'll simply tell you autopilot is disengaged for the remainder of this drive and you will not be able to put it back in. So if you do that, that's when it's going to go against you. But if you're just on autopilot, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute here, but if you're just on autopilot and it disengages because it just got into a situation that was crazy and it needed to, that doesn't count. So don't worry about that. Next is aggressive turning. And this is both left and right. And what they're looking for is this. Anything over 8.9 miles per hour in 1 second while you're making a turn is going too fast. They're gonna ding you for that. And that's actually fairly quick. I mean, when you turn around a corner, and you'll see it in my video in a minute, you do get to like 15, 16 miles per hour as you complete the corner, but that's in like 3 or 4 seconds. So you have to really be punching it to make that really go against you. And the last one is a forward collision warning per 1,000 miles. And you know what this is. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden your car goes beep, 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 and you see the car on your screen turns all red. And the reason why it does that is because it believes that if there's no interaction by the driver, that there will be a collision. And so if that goes on, that's where it really starts to hit you. So make sure you keep your distances and you're watching for that. So those are the 5, but there's one in there that we talked about last time that they actually removed. And that is acceleration. Tesla has completely removed that from the calculator. Tesla wants us to have fun in these cars. They want us to accelerate and enjoy the fun and the power that we paid for. So they're not going to knock you for having fun in this car for accelerating, which is really cool because that was actually a part of the old algorithm, the old formula they were using to calculate this. So now what have we learned? We can accelerate fast, and over 50 miles an hour, we can act like a madman on the highway. I'm totally joking. Don't do that. Now let's get to my very first drive and my score. Now I'm going to do most of this in fast forward and just quickly stop in a couple moments that I want to kind of show you what I was doing. And now keep in mind, my objective here on this drive was to get a perfect score to see if it was possible. And I went 25 miles, so it wasn't a small drive. Let me show you what happened. On the corners, I took them fairly slow. Not like ridiculously slow to where people around me were thinking, man, this guy's slow, but slower than maybe I would normally. And watch my speed as I go around the corner and count in your head every 1 second to see if I'm accelerating by more than 8.9 miles per hour. And you can see that I'm not, and I'm just driving around normally, so it does take quite a bit. I left a lot of room in front of me and the cars in front of me. Even when we came to a stop at stoplights, I gave myself extra room just to make sure that there was no chance of a collision warning popping up on the screen, thinking I wasn't going to stop in time. Really, it's hard to get a collision warning if your foot is actually on the brake. Usually if it's on the accelerator is when you're going to get those collision warnings when you're coming up against cars that are stopped. Most of the time when I was on the highway there, it wasn't really even calculating my following distances because you could see the speed limit was 60 miles an hour and that just simply wasn't calculated on that. We don't know for sure if autopilot themselves, the crew is looking at that, but the actual safety score is not affected by that period of time when you see me here actually on the highway. Of course, if I were to have braked very hard or absolutely just killed the accelerator while I was on the highway, that'd be different. But I wasn't being affected by following too close to another vehicle. But I think the reason why they don't really do that is most people at 60 miles an hour are not anywhere near that close to somebody, and it's probably kind of a moot thing. You probably don't really even need it. Whereas inside the city and all around, you're way closer to people all the time. You kind of have to be. So it's a much bigger conscious effort to keep that distance in the city. And like I said in the beginning, I really didn't feel like it was all that hard. I just drove normally. I tried very hard to not be super weird about it and overdo everything, but I was a little bit more cautious than maybe normal. And you can see here that out of 25 miles, 30 minutes of driving, that I got an absolute perfect score of 100%. Thank you. Thank you. It is possible. So you've seen it for me. I did it here. You saw my video. You can do it too. And if you're getting a score that is lower, think back through some of those recent stats that I just talked about and see if maybe you're missing something there. You're doing one of those things that is getting you in trouble. Now let's talk about my suspicions and things that you really need to know about this scoring program, as well as just the whole idea of us being a part of this beta program in general. The first thing to remember is that we don't have a lot of clarity on how exactly the autopilot team at Tesla is using this safety score. One thing that we do know for sure is that they're not basing the entire eligibility on getting into the program solely on that score, which I think a lot of people think it is. They're not. There are going to be more things factoring in here. This is just one of them, and we don't even know how much of a weight it's going to actually put on it. One example of this is if you look on the website, it says in there that the amount of time that you spend driving doesn't have an impact on your score. The amount of hours you put in, miles, that sort of thing, that doesn't impact your score, but we know it does. We know that if we're going to qualify to be a part of the autopilot program, we can't just leave our car in the garage. We know that. Why would they would not even give us a score, first of all, and they'll have nothing for them to even judge to put you in the program. You're not going to get in if you do that. So there's a disconnect there. So we know that the autopilot program has to be looking at more metrics than just that. The second thing is we don't know how many people they're going to even let into the beta program. There is certainly the risk that if you get a perfect score, you still don't get in. All we do know, though, on a good note, is that Elon did tweet this. When asked, will everyone get the beta right away or about how many upon beta request button? Elon's response was, beta button will request permission to access driving behavior using Tesla Insurance Calculator, which we all know. Here's the important part. He said, if driving behavior is good for 7 days, beta access will be granted. So he doesn't say in there that if you get a perfect score or a good score over those 7 days, then you may be brought into the program. It doesn't say that you'll be selected to be part of the program or you'll be put in a pool where they'll take out 1,000 people out of those perfect scored people. He says if you get if you have good behavior, you will be granted access to it. So I don't know if there's anything else out there to go off of other than that. So that tells me that I mean, if you do good and you pass all the variables, then you're going to be part of the program. Have you guys seen anything else that contradicts that would make you think that only 1,000 or another 2,000 will be added into this program? Another thing to know is that you can actually increase your score by doing long, very good drives. Most of the bad scores you're going to get are from short drives where you had a forward collision warning happen. Those things hit your score really hard. So if you find yourself in a situation where this has happened, maybe you're just going to the grocery store and all of a sudden you get this bam, this big hit to your score, you need to get in your car and increase your daily score. Okay, you need to go on a 20, 30, 40 mile drive, whatever it takes, of just really good clean driving where nothing like that is happening to get your score back up for that day. And we're going to talk about how that's affected here in a minute. And the last thing is that nothing that happens on autopilot is going to affect your score. The way that they see it is if it's on autopilot and it happens, well, that's not really on you, that's on Tesla. So if you get a forward collision warning when you're on autopilot, auto steer is going, that will not count against you. Like I said, the only interaction with autopilot is if it disengages itself because you've ignored all the alerts. But anyone that cuts you off, anything that happens of all these 5 different things they're looking for will not impact you if you're on autopilot. But on the flip side of that, you're also not gaining drive time if you're on autopilot either. So make sure that for these 7 days, that when you go out there, even if you're on a boring road or whatever, and you're trying to rack up some hours, do it while not being on autopilot. Now, what is a bad score? So a bad score is going to be anything under 80, okay? 80 is like you're getting into you're like a C category, and C is not good. You're getting really close to a D, all right? So you want to make sure you're above 80. So if you're getting low, you find yourself going out and you're getting these low scores, maybe they're short drives. Because remember, like if you got a ton of data and one little bad thing happens, not that big a deal. You know, you got a little bit of data and one bad thing happens, well, the curve is really small. You're going to be impacted greatly by that one bad event. So the bigger you can take data from, one little event doesn't seem so bad when there's so many good ones. So think of that as this is happening. So if you've got a score of 80, 85, 87, something like that, just go drive longer, extend that drive longer, take the extra 10-mile loop home, whatever it is, and just make sure that you're getting a lot more data to raise that score up. So how much driving should you do? Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it was my suspicion that you need to have at least 100 hours over the next 7 days. And that's not a lot. I mean, if you just drove for 5 days over the next 7, just drove 20 miles a day, 10 miles to your work and back, well, you're at 100 miles. But I would say anything over 100 is probably good, but I would really be suspicious of anything under that. Now, obviously, we don't have any concrete detail on this, but from what I've gathered, just get over 100, trust me. Okay, now let's talk about the score and really how that actually works, okay? So when you look at the app, you got some pretty cool metrics you can actually look at here. You see your daily score, you got a big thing on top, you got a nice little graph, you can look at previous days, it's all nice and fun. But here's how it actually works. So your daily score is your score for each day. So each specific day, you're gonna have a score for that day. And your rolling score is accumulating and weighted by miles driven each day. So it's going to be looking at all the days and kind of averaging out and looking at the amount of miles you're putting on each day, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to have its own formula to calculate that based on all those different metrics. So if you had a really bad day today, don't worry. You've got other days that can actually bring it up, and you'll see evidence of that as you're driving. So what are the takeaways here? Make sure you're following those 5 different metrics that they're using and follow them pretty closely. I mean, this is kind of a big deal. The fact that they gave us a scoreboard means they're taking this seriously, and you should too. And I've heard from a lot of different people that have already gotten scores down in the 80s. So it does happen. It's not like it can't happen. But if you do get a score down in the 80s, just take some nice long drives, really mellow drives. You're putting miles on the wheel, miles into the system, and you're gonna get a lot more of that kind of watered down, and it's gonna be a lot better for you. So that's where we're at. I've put out a ton of coverage on this over the last few days, and now we know exactly what to expect, how the scoring works, and what metrics are being used. Make sure you tag me down on Twitter, which I'm just starting, so we can actually chat about it and I can see your pictures and all that. And of course, if you haven't figured this out already, it is pretty much just in the United States right now. So hopefully those of you outside of the US are gonna see some results from this in the near future, but there's just not a lot of information on that right now. So I feel bad, but it's kind of where it's at. So that's gonna wrap it up for this one, guys. See you soon.